What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So this is actually going to be the first Scrapped Abilities episode we've made in quite a while now, and based on the feedback from you guys, we're actually going to spend a little bit less time on each ability so that we can cover even more abilities than usual. So hopefully you guys like the change, and I definitely had a lot of fun with it. And if you did enjoy the video, leave a like on it or let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more videos. So the first scrapped ability for today is actually an old version of KAYN's ultimate called Army of Me. At this point, Riot wanted KAYN to have a separate ultimate for each transformation actually. This was one of the first ideas for his Slayer ultimate, and it allowed you to target an enemy champion to create clones of yourself. The first clone would appear near the primary target, and then more clones would spawn near enemy champions in a cone behind the main target. So you could potentially spawn a whole bunch of clones if you line the ability up just right. So the clones would all attack their targets, dealing 30% of KAYN's damage and healing him for 100% of that damage. It seems like the champion designer Daniel Z. Klein already knew at this point that the ultimate actually needed more work, but it's definitely an interesting concept that kind of builds into KAYN's backstory as one of Zed's Shadow Clan members. So another scrapped ultimate was an early REK'SAI concept shared by Riot Beat Punch Beef. Originally, Riot had the idea that through her ultimate, REK'SAI's team would be able to use the same tunnel with her, working kind of like a team-wide Thresh Lantern. Although it was cool in theory, there were actually quite a few problems with this ability. To start with, you'd use the ultimate to get into the middle of the fight, which is rarely where your squishy teammates want to end up being. Another problem was that REK'SAI's gameplay at the time, based on the development that she had, the gameplay kit that she had, was really all about flanking into fights in that version, and those routes didn't allow your team to follow you in since you'd be coming from a totally different side of the map in terms of approaching your opponents compared to your team. So in a REK'SAI Q&A, Riot Beat Punch Beef actually noted that it could be a really cool ability for a tank or support champion in the future as a team-wide map mobility skill. That means that it's actually super likely that it could have been the source of Tahm Kench's ultimate Abyssal Voyage, since it's essentially the same ability but without a lot of the drawbacks that it originally had for REK'SAI. Now our next two abilities are actually two iterations of VEL'KOZ's kit, so apparently he was a really tricky champion to nail down, and the only thing that really stuck around from his original design was his ultimate. The first scrapped iteration of VEL'KOZ's kit had these sort of auto attacks that would tether between him and his target, which would slowly increase in damage and lasted until the target finally moved out of range. Riot Sub Ninja mentioned that he once played this version of VEL'KOZ against a Vladimir in a playtest, attacked him once, and then they both ran towards Vlad's tower where he died from the tether. Now that version was instantly scrapped for pretty obvious reasons, it was just completely broken, but apparently he also had an ability on his E, which the rioters called Boring Dash around this time too, which you might have guessed was just a really short range, kind of fairly boring dash. Now for the second iteration of his kit, VEL'KOZ could create a void portal that he'd shoot his abilities through to amp up the damage, kind of like Jace's acceleration gate. His W at the time created another void portal as well, but this one would shoot little laser beams that could also be affected by the void gate. Now apparently this design actually wasn't super amazing, but it did create tons of super lasers that would fly all over the place, which is definitely pretty funny to imagine in game, and it probably would have been a pretty fun ability to play with too. Now our next scrapped ability comes from Riot Ezreal, answering a question about AMUMU. Ezreal had the idea of turning AMUMU's bandage toss into League of Legends' own version of Spider-Man's web swinging, when he was originally designing the hero, that is. As well as using bandage toss to catch up to enemies, this version of AMUMU's Q would let him hit terrain at a reduced cooldown, so he could use it to kind of swing around the map and quickly move from point A to point B. Now it was actually removed for unconfirmed reasons, but it probably had something to do with the fact that AMUMU kinda needs to be a little bit slower, kiteable in a sense, to be able to balance out the rest of his kit a little bit. Although it would have been pretty funny to see this super hyper mobile AMUMU, the ability was later recreated for Nautilus as Dredgeline, although it's not quite as spammable as the design originally was on AMUMU. It doesn't really make you feel like Spider-Man, that's for sure. Alright, Rumble was a champion created on an insane timeline, to the point where Riot Feral Pony had to create and scrap abilities for him in less than a day each. A few examples of these crazy abilities that could have ended up on Rumble's kit was this chainsaw melee ability, a grenade launcher for some ranged AoE damage, mini rockets, and actually a tether for his E's laser. After eventually coming up with Rumble's E and deciding to turn it into a double shot, Feral Pony had actually originally set it to work as a slow for the first shot, and then it would actually root the opponent if you landed the second shot. And Riot Ezreal actually got super mad about it because the counterplay totally sucked. I mean, after all, it's really hard to avoid the root once you're already slowed from getting hit by the first one. So as a result of the sleep deprivation that was Riot Feral Pony suffering from at the time, while trying to get Rumble finished in time, he had the idea to change the first harpoon to a root, and then the second one would apply a slow. And as you can probably guess, that didn't exactly solve the problem, and Riot Ezreal, who was helping him playtest the design, was a little bit furious, to say the least. Now our next ability is a really exciting one, because it comes from a champion that I guess people don't really think about all that much anymore, and that's ILLAOI. So the most notable part of her gameplay, ILLAOI, is definitely gotta be the tentacles, which first showed up on our Q, Tentacle Smash. Now this ability pretty much remained the same the whole time. As development moved forward and Riot started to figure out who ILLAOI really was and what her god meant to her, they had the idea of giving ILLAOI an ultimate that showed her enemies sort of this truth of the world around them. What that actually manifested as was a change to the entire map, revealing more of these tentacles snaking over all the walls, all the structures, just everywhere. It apparently actually looked just incredibly awesome in game, but the tentacles that would appear didn't actually have any sort of practical function in game. Although this version of ILLAOI's ultimate was scrapped, it did give way to her independent tentacles that spawn and attack for themselves, which in turn paved the way for Riot to finish ILLAOI's development by basing more of her kit on these sort of new independent tentacles that were a little bit more proactive to use. Now we've actually talked a tiny little bit about this next scrapped ability before, but we've got way more information now on it, so I think it's worth going over again. So according to Riot Ezreal, Ahri's original ultimate had unlimited range. She would basically trade mana for the ability to move insane distances, but passing through an enemy actually did crazy damage. This ability was described as basically turning her into a living Ezreal ultimate. Imagine something like maybe Kassadin's ultimate as well, with no cooldown and with a little bit less of a mana cost too. Now the interesting thing is that this ultimate wasn't actually scrapped because it was too broken. It was eventually scrapped because it had really weird interactions on Dominion, which Riot Ezreal said was by far his biggest regret for the character design. Later on, Ahri gained a 3-part dash similar to her live ultimate, but it worked on an ammo system like Akali's ultimate, which meant that she'd always have access to her mobility, but in-game Ahri players would always hold on to one charge in case they got ganked, which made her way too hard to lock down. She was way too safe and just really annoying to play against, so the ammo system for Ahri's ultimate was scrapped as well. Next up, we've got a stealth variation from EVELYNN's rework. Riot Stashu mentioned that one of the biggest problems with permastealth is that you obviously can't track the jungler's location, so early versions of EVELYNN's stealth had some sort of way or trick to it that would give information to her enemies. One iteration of this was a cloud that covered a quarter of the map, moving on a predetermined path through the game that everyone could see on their mini-maps. If EVELYNN was moving inside that cloud, she'd be completely invisible, but if she wasn't in the cloud, she would lose her invisibility entirely. So despite being a potentially good solution for that sort of problem, it felt really frustrating for the EVELYNN players since they essentially had to follow the cloud around, and it didn't really have a very satisfying payoff because people kind of know that you're in the cloud, so they're constantly made aware of when they could potentially get ganked by her. Now for our next one, a player named Monado suggested a new ultimate ability for AHRI on the League of Legends boards. The idea was that he could link with teammates and provide them with lifesteal as a way to kind of tie in with his theme of a demon commander that turns around losing battles. So Riot August actually mentioned that he tried something kind of similar during development, a version of his W that granted health to both AHRI and a nearby low health ally on the third hit. It worked pretty well for AHRI because you could essentially support an ally by dealing damage, but it just felt really frustrating for enemies to play against because the heals would kind of just come out of nowhere sometimes. Now for our next one, it's a little bit less of a scrapped ability and maybe a little bit more of a tweaked ability, but according to Riot Daemon, MAOKAI's Twisted Advance originally once moved at half of the current speed that it does now, but it gave MAOKAI a massive armor buff when he would hit someone with it. On the plus side, it would mean players had a better chance to avoid being locked down in a bad position by MAOKAI, but the huge armor buff would have definitely been super frustrating and crazy overpowered to deal with, since you'd have few choices but to fight him once he jumps in on you, and he'd have way too much armor and be way too tanky for you to deal with. So our last ability for today is actually YORICK'S original ultimate, shared through a pretty interesting story from Riot Daemon. So YORICK'S original ultimate functioned like a combination of AMUMU's Curse of the Sad Mummy and Karthus's wall ability, which likely meant that it was probably a wall that would entangle enemies that passed through it, making it pretty hard to deal with since it could actually be casted from a distance. Now this ultimate was actually changed only 4 days before YORICK was released, with the designer combining a zombie mode and clone functionality, both very difficult systems to make work properly and without any bugs. Riot probably spent those 4 days doing some intense troubleshooting to get it ready, and even then it didn't release without tons of issues, and that's really the story of why YORICK'S release ultimate was just so weird and ridiculous. Either way, that's just about going to wrap it up. Hope you guys enjoyed these abilities for you guys today. I had a ton of fun researching them as well as bring them to you guys. And let me know what you guys think about the new camera setup as well. We've got a lot of adjustments to make with lighting and recording setups and stuff here and there. It's, it's a work in progress, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. So for the second iteration of his kit, VEL'KOZ could create a board. Hey, these socks are pretty nice. As development, as